Hi, I'm Nicholeen Peck, and I teach parenting and good communication all over the world through the lens of the principle self-government. And in this video, we are talking about using a bean jar motivational system. So in this video, we're going to be talking about motivation and how important that is in good connection, good family relationships, and in self-government. And then we're going to talk about this little guy right here, the bean jar, and how you can use the bean jar in your family. So let's talk a little bit about motivation. For a person to want to have a change of heart, which is what self-government is all about, they need to be motivated. So the definition of self-government is being able to determine the cause and effect of any given situation and possessing a knowledge of your own behaviors so that you can control them. So that means that you actually are telling yourself to make a change. You're analyzing yourself and you are choosing to make a change. This means that you have to have a change of heart. Well, some people make changes because they see something negative could occur. So maybe an effect that's a negative effect that they don't like, maybe a negative consequence. But there are more people that make positive changes in their life because they see a positive consequence, something they want to have. Think of how many people will date. It's almost everyone. Why? They don't date usually because they don't want to be lonely, which would be a negative consequence of not dating. They date because they want to find that perfect someone for them to share their lives with, and they know it takes time and it takes effort. So many people get certain jobs, go to school, spend all day working. Why? So that they can improve their lives, not just so that they don't have starvation. That might be for a percentage of the population, but the majority of people love positive consequences and they love to feel motivated. My children were no different. So I have 4 children of my own. They're all grown and gone now. Now I'm the grandma and I'm watching my children raise their children the self-government way and just seeing the beauty and the peace that's coming to their homes and their little lives as they learn to be calm and everything else. But I'm seeing them use negative consequences and ones that the child has to accept so that they have self-government, but also using motivation for the children. Setting up systems where the child cares. Now, my children loved to set up motivation systems for themselves. Where did they learn to do this? Well, in our family, we had family meetings every week. So we had a family meeting and then we had individual mentor meetings. Those happened on a weekly basis. In those meetings, we would discuss problems in the family meetings, and then individual problems, concerns, issues, or goals in the individual mentor meetings. In both of those meetings, we would look at negative consequences and we would look at positive consequences or positive motivations that we could use to help our family be motivated to make a change or to help the individual be motivated to make a change. I absolutely loved it when I saw my children develop motivation systems for themselves without even ever talking to me, just because they knew that if they had a motivation system, they would stick to it. They were highly motivated people because they had a habit of self-motivating. How did they create this habit of self-motivating? Well, number one, we had a habit as a family of working toward positive consequences and motivating ourselves. And we did focus heavily on talking about praise and the good things. So we were constantly bringing up the positive consequences for all of our actions, because when you're learning self-government, you can't just focus on the negative. It's learning cause and effect, but there are positive effects too that definitely need to get as much airtime, if not more, than the negative, so that the family sees that they should be going and can go in that forward positive direction. I remember one time going into my son's room to drop something off, and as I was coming out, I looked at the wall by the light switch. And as I looked at the wall, there was a sticky note, and it said, "Exercise this many times, then you get an ice cream." He had made his own thing, and on the sticky note, he was putting little tick marks every time he would exercise. And once he got up to exercising for a certain number of days, I think it was like, 30 days, maybe a whole month, then he was going to allow himself to have an ice cream. He was going to self-govern himself, I guess, and not have any ice cream until that time, or maybe just have an extra special ice cream at that time. But he had planned it all by himself. My heart was so filled with joy. I looked at that little sticky note and I thought, my little boy is motivating himself. He is essentially driving himself toward excellence. I was so excited for him. And he truly is an inspiring person. He does not tear himself down. He moves himself forward. He doesn't spend time in the negative. He spends his time going forward in the positive. It's inspiring to see. One thing that I did to help my children really learn that they could motivate themselves was to use a bean jar. I often recommend using a bean jar when people are learning the 4 basic skills. The 4 basic skills of self-government that you can find these children's books that teach them on my website, teachingselfgovernment.com. The 4 basic skills of self-government are following instructions, accepting no answers and criticism, accepting consequences, and disagreeing appropriately. What I usually tell people to do is to read this book first. In fact, actually, I usually tell people to read the books in this order: following instructions, accepting no answers and criticism, disagreeing appropriately, and accepting consequences. So if you read the books in this order, then what you do is you read a book and then you talk about the skill, you act out the skill, you role play the skill. And as you do this, you fill a bean jar. So here is a jar of beans. Now, it's not completely filled with beans because it's not done yet, right? So what I would do is I would get 2 jars, an empty jar and then 1 jar filled with beans. Or maybe if we're just learning these 4 basic skills, it might be about this many beans actually. And then I would have another jar, or maybe if there's a glass dish or a cup or something that you're going to move from one to the other. Maybe you have a blue cup and you're moving them to a red cup. Okay? That could let you know that you're done when you get all the beans to the red cup. So every time we work on following instructions, the person gets to take 5 beans out of this jar and put them in the empty jar. Why? Because there are 5 steps to following instructions. The person that they do the role play with also gets 5 beans. So that would mean that every single time that a person uses their skills, their self-government skills, they would get enough beans for however many steps that they used. After you've read all 4 books and done the role play practices for all 4 of those, including learning how to do a correction and accept a correction, you should have the beans from this jar to the next jar filled up. It could take a couple of days. I do recommend, if you're going to do like 1 book a day, then just do a little bit of beans and not the entire jar, because you're going to want to get done and get a treat at the end of that training. It needs to be somewhat immediate. But there is another way to use a bean jar when it's not immediate. So maybe your family senses that they have a problem with something. One time our family had a problem with not wanting to take instruction from each other. So what this meant was that, say someone would say, hey, can you get me a glass of water too? The other person might say, no. Or you can get it yourself. But that doesn't go with the type of family that we have. Our family vision is all about supporting and loving and serving and being kind to each other. So that was selfish. I didn't like the feeling of it, and everyone was doing it. So I decided it was time for a bean jar. I got out 1 empty jar and 1 full jar of beans. And it was this size of a jar all the way filled up. And I said, okay, every single time someone asks you if you could do something for them and you say, okay, you can put a bean in the other jar. Now we really worked this. Like say I said to Porter, hey Porter, will you get me the milk out of the fridge? And he'd say, okay. And he'd get it, and I'd say, Porter, you did such a great job just now getting the milk out of the fridge for me and just saying okay and serving me kindly. You can put a bean in the jar. And so then he would say, okay. And he would put the bean in the jar. And then I would say, hey, Porter, can you put a bean in the jar for me? Because I just did I just took this shoe to somebody else's room for them. And so I did something for them without being asked. And he'd say, okay. And then I'd say, oh, Porter, thanks for doing that. You know what? Just now you put a bean in the jar for me. And so that was something that you did for me. So you can put another bean in the jar because you put a bean in the jar for me. And so now we had this fun little way of putting beans in the jar for each other, as well as doing other things for each other. The whole mood in our family changed. We didn't have the selfishness anymore. Oh, by the way, the whole goal of filling the jar, you got to know that. You have to make a goal. Otherwise, why are you filling the jar? So we decided that once we got all the beans from one jar to the next jar, that we would have a fun family activity and we would go to a water park as a family. That was something that our children really wanted to do, and we just hadn't gone around to doing it, and we decided this was the perfect opportunity because probably within a week or two, we could fill this entire bean jar. And we did. Now you can use a bean jar for anything. Maybe your child is having a hard time being calm. Maybe every time they have a calm face, you say, wow, your face is really calm. Go put a bean in the jar. Or, wow, right now, that was a really hard moment for you to stay calm, but you did it. Or maybe sharing is something that we would put a bean in the jar. Anything that relates to kindness maybe, or service. You could use the bean jar for all kinds of stuff in your family. Now, I am gonna caution you, don't use the bean jar all the time. Just pull it out every so often, because motivational systems like this lose their magic after a couple of weeks. In fact, I will say whatever goal you make sure you only have enough beans in there that will only take up to 2 weeks. If it takes longer than 2 weeks, you might lose focus and stop filling the jar again. But in the meantime, if you can do it in 2 weeks, it's a great way to have one focus area that the whole family is working on, this one issue. They're joining together. You get something to do as a family afterward. It creates a really motivating atmosphere for the family. So that's just a little bit about motivation and just a tiny bit about teaching self-government and just one little add-on thing called a bean jar. But you probably want to learn a lot more about the skills and principles of self-government if you're really going to be using self-government at your house. I have a video on this channel. It's a full-length class and it's called The Not So Known Secret for Parenting Success. If you click on the link to that video now, you will get a great overview of a lot of the skills and principles of self-government so that your family can experience self-government and a change of heart.